Welcome to another edition of CATAA's TechNOW television. I'm your host, Kevin Wennekes, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our special Public Safety Broadband Network series, where we interview experts in the public safety sector regarding the Public Safety Broadband Network and get some of their guidance and thoughts on how this campaign should move forward. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me Ernest MacGillivray, who is alignment champion for public safety in New Brunswick government. And Ernie has spent 20 years in various roles in the emergency management community, including 9 as New Brunswick's Director for Emergency Management and Emergency Services. He worked at the national level on public alerting strategy, mitigation strategy, and was part of the team that developed Canada's interoperability strategy and action plan.
I think the issue of the spectrum, we crystallized that for elected officials that got on side back in, I think, 2008 or 9 in a big way. And it's taken the last 5 years to get to where we are. So thank you, Government of Canada and the ministers across the country that have got behind us. They understood that the spectrum is like beachfront property. And if you don't ever, if you can't get in there and get it while the getting's good, you're going to pay a lot more for that waterfront view down the road. So we were able to get their heads wrapped around the spectrum with that kind of an analogy. We're going to need some new analogies to talk about the capabilities. But I think what we're going to have to be able to speak to in getting governments to invest, whether it's municipal, and it may well be early adopters at the municipal level, not provincial level. But we need to be able to talk about benefits to the public. We need to be able to talk about benefits to our workforce, worker safety. We've got to be able to talk about operational efficiencies because, the cost curve on emergency services is going up. And that's troubling for governments. Governments are holding the line on healthcare spending and struggling with increases in senior care. So there's a lot of budget pressures at a provincial level. It's hard to throw money at this, but there is a way I'll come back to at the end. Worker safety, operational effectiveness, and the quality of service that the public receive. So if emergency medical technicians have better information, real-time connectivity back to an ER with an ER physician, you might just get better outcomes in somebody's dooryard than you might otherwise get. It takes half an hour to get somebody to an ER. That's too long a lot of the time, and then you have much more serious situation and a much more expensive situation to manage in a hospital setting. The more services that can be provided by our emergency services, diverting people from the justice system, diverting people from the health system, the better off we're going to be. But to get there, we're going to have to prove those things that I talk about. I think the one thing that we can leverage is increasingly, I think provincial governments are focused on smarter government and innovation and looking at the economic benefits associated with those, reducing cost of government, cost of service delivery, while stimulating economic growth, and technology growth is really what we need. That's GDP goes up when you have technological innovation. So governments are focused on that. So somehow linking the development of capabilities using public sector broadband and economic development through innovation is probably the best play in order to get government support for this. And indeed, if you go back to the arguments that were made by the federal government with their own federal agencies, they saw the economic value of spectrum being reserved for this. They saw it in economic terms. So we're going to have to make those business case arguments to municipal CEOs, to the people that sit around cabinet tables and write big checks for important things.
We had Senator White on the show last week, where he was very clear in indicating that there's really no appetite at the federal government level for being the sole funder of this initiative, and that clearly collaboration will be required, provincial, municipally, and with private sector. From a provincial point of view, is that something you would term is entirely valid from the New Brunswick perspective? And then what would you recommend in terms of the type of partnerships you would see as being most beneficial in the deployment of this network?
You know, I think there's a bunch of conversations that have to happen with a bunch of people before we can answer that question. But, you know, I think a good analogy, it's a Canadian success. And the Canadian context is somewhat different from Australia or the US. We could talk about that. We have a different division of responsibilities constitutionally, and primacy for public safety and security is at the provincial level, and municipalities pay for a lot. So Australia and the States, there's a lot more federal funding for this kind of thing. So yes, there is no federal appetite to be the funder of this. But that was the same as for public alerting. So when we built the new public alerting capabilities for Canada more than 5 years ago now, there was great reluctance around the table to throw money in a pot. In fact, we had two ways to go at the time. It's a bit of a tale out of school now, but one way was throw a whole bunch of money at Public Safety Canada and have them manage a capability with the provinces contributing about 50%, or partner with somebody who had a vested interest in being a service provider and would derive some benefit from that. So the end of that tale was we partnered with Pelmorex, which owns the weather network in Météo Média. They saw a big advantage in being the technology and service provider, providing the back office, if you will, for a national public alerting capability. And in exchange, they were given some preferential rights vis-a-vis cable and satellite distribution and some things like that. It's worked out well. We now have a system that's truly national, and with the assistance of the regulator, again, a 10 or a 20-year journey, but we now have mandatory distribution by over-the-air broadcasters. So just in the last year, we've seen a real change in the whole paradigm in terms of the number of private sector partners that are now getting on board. But we had to have the governance, we had to have the vision, we had to find someone that was willing to provide the core capability, and that wasn't free. It cost somebody something, whether we're paying for it through our cable subscriptions or what have you. But at the end of the day, we had to reduce the cost for jurisdictions to participate in a national public alerting system, or they wouldn't have done it. And I think it's the same here. We're going to need a lot of contributors to this who aren't government, departments of public safety, or aren't police force or fire departments. We're going to need other contributors, and they're going to have to derive some benefit from that, whether it's, frequency swaps, or whether we rent spectrum and use revenue from that to help pay for the build out of capabilities. We don't know yet. As I said, we haven't really had those chats, but it will be a long road, and we're going to have an open mind. But I think your sense is right, Kevin, that at the end, it's going to be a collaboration. It's going to be a whole bunch of people, public, private, not-for-profit, that are contributing to this to make it a success. There won't be any one single payer for this.
Well, Ernie, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time you've taken and the thoughts you've shared with us today. I think we can summarize from this that it's not going to be a short road. There's a lot of work still left to be involved, but the right attitudes, the right collaboration, the right spirits in place, and obviously with champions such as you continuing to be behind it, I'm confident that we're going to see some great developments in the coming year and years as we move forward. So maybe one final thought for you to help bring this particular episode to a close. And with that, I'll offer you my thanks.
I think you got to have a long view. So a lot of these things will take considerable time and effort and strategic investments along the way to be successful. There's a long game. So if you just argue, I need more resources today in order to do something, you don't get very far with strategic initiatives like this. This is the kind of game changer that public alerting was, or digital data in the cars, or GIS being enabled for business lines of various kinds. So, but I do think by attaching this to an innovation agenda, we'll have success. we'll have to stay the course, be patient, and continue to bang away at it.
Great. Thanks, Ernie.
Pleasure.